Hello, and welcome to an adventure like no other. Far more than what you have known, there is something far more to be known than you can ever know. And it is all about you, the real you, your real awareness with your intuitive senses. You were never taught that the real you, your real awareness, is operating 5 bodies in cause and effect, restricting creation. You have been taught to think that you are only a one-dimensional human person, with a mind and emotions, and with a very short lifespan on this planet Earth. More than what your mind can grasp is your intuitive senses that can be opened to see beyond all your restrictions. You have always had an opening to see beyond what you have known, and this has been purposely kept from you, and this is where you have heard rumors and stories about your nightly dreams. Your so-called dreams is your opening to your intuitive senses that will allow you, the personal you, to excel beyond what you have previously known. Everyone has intuitive senses, and very few people take advantage of what is possible by recognizing something more than their mind can understand. Creation has its place for all of us, and then there is all life, which is far more than anything than what can become with creation. Everything we experience is necessary for us to survive with whatever we choose and decide our life to be. New Kevin Smith is the great witness to something more than what can be taught and learned in any school. It can be so that when anyone first listens to Kevin's intuitive side experiences, also known as real side experiences, from what their personal mind has known, Kevin's manner of expression will at first be rather different to comprehend. This is where this introduction and reading the new books and Facebook groups will help. Have fun deciding. Duane the Great Writer and Seer.
In this real side experience, I would find myself attending a wedding. The situation was as follows. In an undisclosed position within multi-dimensional creation, there would exist 2 species. These 2 species had been in perpetual conflict with each other for what impressions revealed were many centuries of time, and although no details were afforded as to the specifics, as to the reasons behind this animosity, or indeed its exact origins, this was the situation, that of a war and strife without end. Each side were evidently evenly matched in regards to military prowess. Each opposing species boasted high levels of technology, were space-faring, and so, as you might imagine, the arenas of a conflict would take place on the surface of the various planets in the region of creation they shared, but additionally amongst the stars in space. After these many centuries of conflict, so a compromise seemingly had been ventured, that the daughter of what would be the equivalent of the royalty of one species would be matched with the son of the royalty of the other, rather reminiscent of time-old traditions of the earth and human species, and a theme portrayed in endless movies, that of a marriage between rival peoples, that the hostilities as harboured between them can be diminished, or ideally no longer perpetuating at all. The same models of behaviour and social consciousness ideas reverberating throughout multi-dimensional creation, only taking place in different positions and involving different body types. As I said in the beginning, I would be attending this marriage as though in a witness capacity, and although I could have readily observed this from an aside the simulated situation real awareness view, as the real awareness is a part of the isness everything, an everything reality that permeates through all consciousness affected circumstance, and where everything transpiring in creation is available for the real awareness's perusal, it seemed the preference was for my actual presence. I had a form I was operating through, and as part of the gathered congregation, seated with the various other spectators and onlookers, all in attendance, representing both sides, both species, that were shortly to become as allies as opposed to rivals. Impressions revealed that this situation was of importance, not just from the personal perspective, that of the resolution of created and simulated drama that had existed between the species for the centuries that it had, but should the conflict cease, all involved would no longer have their focus and attention utterly captivated with the creational drama. There was potentiality of both species stepping up and at least considering the merits of pursuing the process of awareness, and that each were technologically orientated and not in controlled, subjugated circumstances, such as the various slave species, and where such enslaved species are therefore more limited, so these two species could be rather instrumental in regards to the various multi-dimensional, life-beneficial galactic operations, and in positions where they could have a greater reach and influence than your typical restricted slave species. Always a bonus in regards to distribution of the ALLLISSS pertaining references and the New You song True Reality connection, as though this marriage was an arrangement that not only would bring both species into a conjunction, but would allow all involved, each respective individual from each species, to have much by way of the ideas that had engrossed them for the longest time, ideas associated with the war and strife that had defined their lives, to be released, to no longer be demanding focus and consideration, as though thrown out with the garbage was a vast proportion of the books that line the bookcase, that the opportunity and space now available affords the consideration of something other than what had been embraced for the longest time, but rather than fill the space with other restricting ideas of creation, as would be the case absent of references that pertain to the ears. Instead, each individual of each species would have this opportunity afforded, that of positioning with the ears, should it be ultimately recognized, as the vast bulk of that which had presented as the species' chosen creational distraction would be removed. The wedding would be taking place within the territory of one of the species, the body forms of which appeared human overall. The only feature that distinguished them from the typical human body type was that the species possessed of only 3 fingers and toes, as opposed to 5, as is the standard with the human form. As for the other species, their body types were not as consistent, still bipedal, walking on 2 legs, but more a mixture of various animal-like forms, some comparable to earth-based animals, others not, and somewhat indescribable. A rather constant expression of body types in creation is that of walking animals, and I have shared many real-side experiences where this type of body form featured in the various capacities and situations that they have. Impressions revealed that I was as though to witness this wedding, which would cement the alliance between the species, and then would be the opportunity to present them with the year's references, the new you song, and potentially encourage them to assist with our various multi-dimensional endeavors and objectives. As I said, with the ideas that had engrossed the two species removed, they would be more receptive to other ideas, ideally ideas that would be their creational liberation, as opposed to creationally binding ideas of restriction that would simply fill the void the ideas they had abandoned had left behind. At that moment then, I would be in the capacity of an infiltrator, for to present myself in a form other than those that each species comprised of wouldn't be very prudent as impressions suggested, at least not at that stage, as very likely I would just be another unnecessary distraction from the proceedings, were I to be operating in a form unfamiliar to them, somewhat counterproductive then. The best means of gleaning the agreement and assistance of others is through cultivating rapport, nullifying hostility, best achieved through a mimicry of form, as all beings tend to derive comfort when confronted with a face that is that of their own kind. As I said, I was only observing at this stage, and my opportunity of ALLLISSS presenting would avail itself after the proceedings were concluded, and it would be apparent then that I was not as one of their species, so very possibly then would I drop my outer body form facade, or maybe retain it, for as I said, negotiation can process more smoothly where all involved are comfortable and put at ease. My adopted outer form then would be that of the species comprising of the various assorted animal types, and I would assume a walking two-legged wolf exterior, as this indeed was one of the animal forms prevalent among those the species consisted of. I would be among others of both species, the humanoids and the animal types, on a series of bench-like seatings provided. Sat beside me would be another of my current adopted species, a form that could be most closely approximated to a two-legged bear. As is the case where we are operating among other species, not only can the appropriate form be afforded, but as the real awareness is a part of the isness that is through all consciousness as I mentioned, so every language, every species, social consciousness quirk, and psychology is available to the real awareness, and is additionally afforded where required that we can blend in, that our ruse or infiltration isn't discovered. Each of the two species would have its own language, a language that wouldn't be understood then from a human's perspective, but as I was operating as one of them, as I had access and complete marshalling of their language available, communication wasn't an issue, and indeed the experience presented as though a verbal exchange were taking place in English, as though translated for the benefit of my personal self. Throughout the build-up to the ceremony, I would cultivate quite the friendship with the bear-like being sat beside me, and interestingly, certain of the animal body forms of the species I was a part of would be adorning dragon-like masks, as though this were established species protocol. It seemed the wolf body forms were expected to observe such a protocol also, for indeed I would have the mask in my possession, and at a certain point I would slip it over my wolf face, the upper portion of it at any rate, my furry snout still revealed and protruding from under it. The son to be married would be of the humanoid species, and would be waiting patiently on a raised area at the head of this congregation in the company of his royal humanoid parents. The daughter then would represent the royalty of the animal species, and my view would momentarily switch to where I was marking her progress. She would be making her way alone to where the building we were in was positioned. Her mode of transport appeared to be a kind of flying dragon, and her journey would take her across a very inhospitable, snow-covered and mountainous region, and so I was afforded a glimpse of the environment of the particular planet we were on, one that was within the territorial boundaries of the humanoid species, as I said. The daughter of the animal species royalty was as reptilian as her flying mount, as seemingly two-legged lizard forms featured as one of the variety of body types as a part of the animal species. At this point, however, impressions would reveal that the animal species were to be betrayed, that although enough trust and assurances must have been exchanged that the animal people were content to allow their royal daughter to attend the wedding alone, on what would have been for the longest time hostile ground, presumably this was the agreed-to arrangement, that she would be absent of escort or protection, the humanoid species were in actuality harbouring intent to assassinate the lizard daughter within the very ceremonial building where the wedding was to take place. This impending deception was unbeknownst to all but the royal most inner circle of the humanoids, those most entrusted, which mitigated any chance of the plot being leaked. As I said earlier, as individuals or species release or abandon a certain idea attachment or infatuation, or if the ideas are no longer available and are for whatever reason denied, generally they will latch onto alternative limiting ideas. For the personal self is rather at a loss as to how to operate absent of its attitudes, dramas, and attachments. It has a penchant to always be chasing something, until such time where coming into its experience is the consideration of that which is aside from all ideas of creation, the unknown endlessness of the true reality. The personal self does delight in sensation and drama. The more extreme, the more appealing it is from an emotional perspective, and it was as though here the humanoid species were loath to let go of the conflict that had defined them for so many centuries. For the personal self has a preference for that which is familiar. A creature of habit can best describe it. Comfort is derived from that which is familiar, and the personal self has a tendency to wallow in its comfort affording patterns of perpetual behaviour and routine, even if the routines are drama or abrasively based. The humanoids could so easily have followed through with the arrangement, the conflict between their species and the animal people abated, but they simply couldn't break loose of their routines of war and strife. And even though perhaps some of the humanoid people, and indeed the animal species, may have desired peace, the ideas that were their species' conflict were deeply ingrained, subconsciously placed through many lifetimes and generations, and unless a process of awareness that entails a facing and releasing of all ideas of consciousness is embraced, and these ideas, attitudes, and dramas that interconnected both species were faced and released, affected always will be this conflict in some shape or form, as this was the idea foundation of the karma that interconnected them, that even as they were moments away from a resolution that would end their war, manifested were circumstances from this idea template of conflict where this opportunity would be squandered and war perpetuated and very likely exacerbated as a result of this betrayal, the assassination of the royal daughter of the animal people. Impressions revealed this murder would take place, very likely the building would descend into a chaos, and what would follow for each species would be overall a creational distraction, that of the perpetuation of a conflict, and very unlikely would there be the chance to then present the opportunity of the true reality and the option of galactic project participation. The bookshelf of ideas would be fully stocked and embraced once more, with no room for additional idea consideration. I wouldn't remain to witness what would ensue, but had the sense that although normal services, that of a species conflict would resume, there still may be the possibility of approaching individuals of each species, if not the species in their entirety, and perhaps there may be other windows of opportunity in regards to dealings with the royalty of each species, as they would have the authority where it comes to the direction each species in their entirety would take, always prudent to deal with those that command the most authority, that have the most influence in regards to the species they represent. I was not there to interfere with the free will choices that would manifest as they would, but perhaps at a later stage I may have further interactions with the species, as I evidently was shown this for a reason, as a first tentative step into the simulated reality the two species share in conjunction with each other. In a brief scene that followed, I would be in a darkened natural setting, and a curious being would manifest before my eyes. I was unable to ascertain the design of his body form, as he was adorned in a kind of all-encompassing spacesuit, though his face partially visible through the transparent headwear, and where apparent was it that he was far from human, although limited was my view of him that I couldn't really identify his species, something along the reptilian lines, were I to venture a guess. It was as though he was to be traversing this particular location. Impressions revealed that a little like in the previous scene, he was rendered somewhat vulnerable as he did so, as though facilitated by other beings was the means by which he could transition from one dimension to another. But like the previous scene, this was a deceptive ruse, and he was set to be eliminated at what was the threshold between the safety that the dimension he had departed from afforded, and the safety the dimension he was traversing into would provide, as though the area between the two presented as the only position where he was in danger. This reptilian individual was of some significance, and it was determined that imperative was it for his body form survival, as though he was another key asset potentially in regards to our various galactic projects and associated life beneficial endeavors. Exactly why he had to make this hazardous dimensional transference journey, and why other beings were required to facilitate it, and indeed who they were, and why they were choosing to betray the reptilian's trust and then eradicate him wasn't made apparent. But as is always the case in regards to what can transpire between body forms, only agreement can determine all potential outcomes. The ideas that each respective involved individual consciousness harbours that allows the ability and extent of the imposition of others, for absent of the idea and no assimilation can follow. If a being intends to eliminate the space-suited reptilian, the reptilian must have the idea agreement's consciousness installed that this can be so in relation to the being. As impressions revealed, the reptilian could indeed be eliminated as he crossed between dimensions. The distribution of agreements then were such between him and his intended assassins that allowed this as a simulated potentiality. However, the reptilian also had afforded me the ability to operate as his protector. He had laid out his movie set as the decider. He had assigned the roles of assassins that the deceptive beings could assume through virtue of the idea agreements of his consciousness, but had allowed for a role to also be stepped into where I could feature in an intervention capacity. The reptilian could have simply returned from whence he came and his safety assured, but imperative was it that he reach this other dimensional position as made possible by the beings set to betray him, as though his presence in the dimension that he required to reach was essential and had far-reaching and simulator impacting ramifications, more along the positive lines, hence why elements of what were very likely then the dark forces were intent on preventing him from doing so, or afford him the means, but eliminate him en route, as it were, through the only way they could, that being when he ventured into a position between the safety of the two dimensions, where he was rendered vulnerable to the deceptive being's attack, as I said. And so it was that I would escort him safely across the dimension space, revealing to him the intended assassination attempt, and although I anticipated then the elimination effort that would ensue, there would be no evidence of it, as though the beings intending to do this realized the futility of its execution, for impressions suggested I would be fully capable of ensuring the key and essential reptilian survival as he made his precarious dimensional transference, and so the deceptive beings perhaps considered it pointless to even try, though guaranteed was it that they would have attempted the assassination were I absent from the scene. The brief scene ending there, the reptilian was escorted across the area we were in to the dimensional position he required, and perhaps this again represented a first step of my dealings with this character, and it will be interesting to see what comes of this, or what further details are provided in regards to it.
And so again, these are the steps that we have to go through. Me too, in the personal sense, and with the funding, I deal with knuckleheads all over this world. And these are the know-it-alls. They think they really know something, and they don't. And so trying to educate them into something that makes sense for the world, instead of just chasing money and watching it being destroyed, well, that's a huge project. That's huge to do. So again, I'm very grateful, and that's why I wrote that thank you for you and Kevin and Val and others, that the few that step up, because there's only a few people that know anything at all, and to recognize this, that's huge. And like in Kevin's last experience where he saw me as the little girl, well, that's because that is the innocence of life. And children represent that. And for me, the most sincere that I see is children, and especially the girls. And that's how I've seen is. And so that's what I replicate in my sincerity with what is real. And so that's how he sees that like that. But I see this reality, and I don't know who else does. And that's what it takes. That's why so many people have come and gone. And in the meantime, we are like drugged through all this stuff, like Kevin's experiences, and it takes a lot for us to get focused, pay attention, and really decide to practice seeing what's real. It takes a whole lot, even if we got to deal with dragons and battles and whatever, to finally wake up to really want to see something else. I appreciate everybody that stepped up. I sincerely do, because in my personal sense, I learn a lot too. I learn how to be able to, be more creative and to more ideas to get to people to share and wake up things, etc. Wake them up and give them the chance, because everybody is precious. Each person individual, and we do it one at a time, is precious. And usually if I can talk to people, I can bring them around many times, because again, you have to have many creative viewpoints, not just talk to people, not just tell them about the new you or so. They don't know what that is. You have to see it from their viewpoint. You have to be very, very creative. It takes a whole lot. This is how the boys are. This is how Rebas are and the boys are. They tricked us into doing this, and it took a lot of tricks to get us here, for us to recognize something and to start to see them. You have to know this. It's not just in the literal sense. That most of that is really duh stuff. Look at what Paul created. And I was there. I know, I went through it. I was to see what not to do. That's a big one. What not to do. Most people weren't there. They didn't see that. You need that as a reference as to what not to do, because it's not literal. That's why what Paul presented at that time worked for that time, because that was grade school, kindergarten, first grade, second grade. Not anymore. Life is new, it's real, and that's why the boys chose me, because I wasn't going to do it like that. Because if I did, it would go nowhere. And you can think, oh, gee, look at all the members we have. Look at all the people. They're all just robots, is what they are. Last night I saw Darwin again, and I don't even think about him. And I was with Darwin, very familiar on the building committee. I knew Darwin very well. And there he was with his group of having a seminar, etc. And I kind of walked through there for a moment and walked out. And it's all the same duh stuff, etc. What we're doing is so preciously unique. And who can see it? Who can really sincerely see it? It's not about what we're doing here. It's not about the creation. It's not about the experiences. This should lead you to deciding to want to recognize this isness above and beyond anything else. But you have to know the three nothings, and you have to decide to give up everything, but at the same time deal with it. And that's huge. And who can figure that out? So in the meantime, yeah, we're going to go through these experiences until people decide to wake up, or they just give up and then they just go back to their personal life.